Let me tell you a little story about my childhood. Ever since I was a small kid, probably even younger than 4 years old, I was exposed to a serviceable cable channel that primarily aired cartoons and was also an international version of the popular North American television network called Cartoon Network. Now, because it was a multinational version aiming at multiple countries that spoke multiple languages, they had no incentive to replace the audio with permanent and fixed dub voices, with the exception of several countries here and there that had switchable audio, with some of them eventually just launching their own exclusive channels, which I'll get into that later. But to me, the optimal dub would be Portuguese, since that's my native language. But that's only hypothetically, because truth be told, I'm really glad that I was exposed to the original English voices. It was a little bit inconvenient that I didn't even have subtitles to help me read into the dialogue, but honestly that never bothered me. I was completely satisfied and in love with the works as they were. In fact, I hated Portuguese dubs. Every time I would watch an animated movie airing on some of the local channels and they weren't broadcasting it with the original English voices, since I knew that's how they were originally voiced, I would always get mad. So I guess you could say that at an early age, I had already developed a strong anti-dub elitism. As far as why I felt this way, well, it's hard to say. I like to believe that I grew to be fascinated by the language that these characters I was very fond of all spoke universally across all of the cartoons I watched, which inspired me to want to learn more about the language instead of hearing fake voices that felt inauthentic. I will happily say that I owe a lot to not only Cartoon Network, but all of the American and British media I watched during my childhood, which inspired me to learn how to speak English more than a lot of people I knew at the time. I would set all of my devices to English. I roleplay with my action figure speaking in English even though I would constantly pronounce shit wrong. I had pretty good experiences in English classes, which, on that subject, I'm really glad the school I attended gave English classes starting in first grade, which I would later find out that that's actually pretty rare for that to be the case where I lived. Most schools in my city only start giving English classes around high school, so yeah, I was pretty lucky, and it did certainly help me develop my English, even though I would still argue that my exposure to English media probably did more to improve my skills. Schools mostly just helped me internalize grammatical and sentence structuring rules. Anyway, now that I'm done jerking off to Cartoon Network, let's head to the nitty-gritty. In 2013, Cartoon Network PT was released, at least according to Wikipedia. Now, I don't know how the previous version of Cartoon Network for Portugal used to work. I know it used to be called C in Europe or something like that, but I'm not sure what language they spoke. I assume it was English, at least according to the history data I observed. Well, actually, to be honest, it's more than just an assumption. I'm like 99.9% sure of that, since there are petitions available online combating the removal of English voices. But hey, I wasn't living in Portugal at the time, so I don't know shit. But in any case, Cartoon Network PT became the main branch for Portugal after it was launched in 2013. Now, this barely affected me because, first of all, at the time, I wasn't really interested in the channel, and I thought to myself that even if I were to regain interest in it, I still have the HQ version, which was thankfully available in my country. But then I learned something very interesting. You see, the cable company that was set up in my household during my childhood was called Cable TV, but in Portuguese. I know it's not a very creative name, but that's not important. For years, they've had the license for Cartoon Network HQ, but then sometime around the middle of this decade, they removed it completely. Now, it is believed that one of the reasons Cartoon Network PT was launched was because airing cartoons in English didn't seem to pay off, as they were less appealing to the Portuguese-speaking children, which I can only assume that's the reason these bastards removed HQ and eventually replaced it with PT. And they were not the only ones. DSTV, a sub-Saharan African cable company, used to have CNHQ in a special package called DSTV Boé, which was mainly aimed at Portuguese-speaking countries, but then at some point they removed it. And if you wanted to have access to it, you had to pay for the premium package, a much more expensive package, might I add, that contained most of the channels they had the license to, though with a reduced number of Portuguese channels. And then, what do you know, once CNPT was released, they took that bitch and added to the Boé package. In fact, according to Wikipedia, they got it even before Portugal did. Now, to me, this was a bit disheartening, simply because probably the most influential channel of my childhood became so much less accessible so fucking quickly. And sometime around 2015, I was regaining interest in cartoons, and a little before that, I was going through a bit of a nostalgia trip. Do you know how convenient it would be if I had CNHQ available to me, which would help me satisfy this enthusiasm I was feeling at the time? But boy, I was fuck out of luck. None of my parents paid for DSTV Premium, and I was certainly not going to watch Portuguese Dubs, so I was like, fuck it. Hey there, Kiss Cartoon, watch cartoons online, fucking torrent sites. Let's establish a little bit of an everlasting relationship. Then when I moved to Portugal, things at first seemed worse since the classic pan-European version of Cartoon Network that used to be the standard, I don't even think it exists here in Portugal anymore. But recently I attained a new and improved contract with Vodafone, and they seem to give me the option to switch the audio tracks, which is weird because I specifically remember not being able to do that before. Maybe this is a recent thing, or I just didn't know I could do it. I do know that I couldn't choose English voices back in my home country with DSTV, so I guess in the meantime, I have access to original voices. Legally this time. I don't really see myself engaging with this channel because I've become a hardcore online binge watcher these past years, so I am willing to give you guys some credit, but your utility will be somewhat minimal in the meantime. I've said this before in a previous video that I'd prefer if you guys gave us a subscription-based streaming service, and until you do that, I'm still gonna find illegal streaming services to be more optimal. But don't worry, I'll occasionally engage in casual watches when I feel the need to pass time. But if you don't think that's enough and you still want to moral shame me, fine, you can visit my Discord server and start a conversation with me. Who knows, maybe my devil side will fade as my angel side slowly leads me to the good kids club, and then I'll eventually join the anti-piracy campaign and basically become Jeff.